Hello and welcome to the Business of Story, which is brought to you by Voices, the world's #1 creative service marketplace with over 2 million registered users. Visit voices.com for all of your voiceover talent, audio production, music composition, and translation services needs. Hi, I'm Park Howell, and I'm so glad you're here today because we're going to explore the powerful sales stories your positive mindset will create and the impact it will have on your life.
To me, we need to learn about two things. One is about life, that's on the outside. But secondly, we got to learn who we are. What are the best qualities? How do you become a peak performer? How can you lead a life that's optimized on a physical level, on a psychological level, or a spiritual level, so that you move forward confidently towards your dream that is meaningful to you?
We are so lucky to have with us today Gerhard Gschwandtner, who has trained over 10,000 sales professionals in Europe and the U.S. Gerhard started Selling Power magazine in 1982 and turned it into the world's leading sales management magazine. His mission is to contribute to the success of sales leaders with sellingpower.com, a sales intelligence platform that's visited by over 300,000 sales leaders every single month. Gerhard also runs 4 Sales 3.0 conferences a year and is the creator of the Peak Performance Mindset Workshop, designed to help salespeople transform from self-limiting beliefs into self-empowering beliefs. You can learn more about their live training, keynote speakers, and online training courses at mindsetscience.com. And that is exactly what we're exploring today. 4 ways you can use mindfulness to create more powerful stories you can live into and prosper from. So please welcome to this special edition of the Business of Story, Gerhard Gschwandtner. Gerhard, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a great pleasure.
You and I have had a chance to chat a couple times before this. I am absolutely fascinated with the work you've been doing on an international level with salespeople for many, 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 many years. And I have our good friend Alice Hyman to thank for connecting us. And I'm really, really glad she did because I'm fascinated by your work.
Well, I'm really fascinated by your musical abilities. And one day I want to go to one of your concerts.
Well, don't hold your breath, Gerhard, because I am not a performer. My wife says you can get up and talk in front of 5,000 people about storytelling, and you seem to have no problem doing that, which I really don't. But you can't play in front of 5 people in our living room. And I said, no, it scares the hell out of me. I can't do that. That's why I was a composition and theory major, not a performance major.
Well, then we have to talk about the mindset later, because you can shift that mindset and then you play in front of 10,000 people.
I would love that. And you know what it is? I really think, in fact, I still have this today when I'm preparing to go on stage anywhere. When I was a kid, I wouldn't necessarily get prepared like I should or practice for my recitals. And Hannah Hubbard, my first piano teacher, God bless her, she knew I loved it, but she knew I was kind of lazy when it came around practicing. And I remember a few of those holiday recitals where I sat down and all the parents were there and I just completely blew it. And I remember the shame I felt back then. And you'd think I'd learn because I would go on to more recitals and then some would be good, some not so good. But I did finally realize that it's all in the preparation. And I think it's still some of those shameful events, looking back, is probably why I don't like to sit down and play in front of people.
Well, I think there's a formula, which is that experiences lead to a belief system depending on how you interpret the situation. So you played the piano, you got critical looks from parents, and you felt ashamed because you told yourself, I should be better than that, or I blew it and I'm a bad piano player, or whatever a critical message you gave yourself that stuck with you. And you can get unstuck by changing that narrative and say, that was an isolated experience. I blew it once. And since then, I had not a repetition of that experience. And I can liberate myself from that negative self-talk and then move on and joyfully play in front of hundreds of people.
Well, there you go. I mean, welcome to the show. I didn't know we were going to do some psychoanalysis on me, but I love it because that's going to be helpful. But this is what, folks, you're in for today with Gerhard. He has a fascinating background in sales and sales development, having trained thousands and thousands and thousands of salespeople around the world. Gerhard, how did you, well, number one, where do you reign from? And how did you get into sales in the first place?
Well, as you recognized from my name and my accent, that I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska.
Of course, from a long generation after generation of corn farmers, I believe.
Like the governor.
Yes.
So I grew up in Salzburg, Austria. And believe it or not, I joined an amateur theater group while I was in school, and I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating to me because I was sort of timid and shy, and then I learned the script and walked on stage, and I remember the first appearance ever. My first line delivered on stage got a huge laugh from the entire audience, and it gave me a big boost. And then at the end of that performance, there were some people lined up and they wanted my autograph. There was this little girl and said, are you famous? And I said, not yet, but now that I sign autographs, I probably will be famous.
Do you remember the line?
No, but it was, the play was called Harvey. And it's a play where Jimmy Stewart plays in it. And he has a 6-foot white rabbit that's invisible. It's only visible to him, an imaginary rabbit. It's a great comedy. But going back to the experience of learning lines and stepping into character helped me tremendously later in my career in sales training, because I created sales training programs where I called it interactive video training, where salespeople, I was joking and I said, I'm trying to help salespeople to impersonate a professional.
To impersonate a professional because they're not professionals themselves, or they don't believe they are?
Most salespeople are amateurs, and professionals really rehearse, and they develop what I would call an executive presence, that people take other people seriously when they begin to listen. Like in the beginning of this podcast, I was listening to you and your experience with the piano, and we were just riffing about that. But I think it behooves on anybody in any conversation to not just pay attention to what you want to say, but pay attention to what you hear, and then follow that rabbit trail, what you hear, and be curious about the other person's mindset. Where's that other person coming from? What kind of a day did they have until you met them? Let them express themselves and become a witness to that miracle of a collaborative conversation.
So you grew up in Salzburg, Austria, home to one of my all-time favorite composers, Mozart.
Yes.
I mean, just being around it, I've never been there. I can't wait to visit someday because I would love to. And my favorite movie, Amadeus, of course.
Right.
What then got you into sales? So you had this big hit as a youngster. Everybody's asking for your autograph. You are now a star in Salzburg. What got you into the sales work?
Well, I was offered roles in the theater, and I turned them down because I asked him, how much do you pay? And it didn't pay much. And I realized there was not a career that I wanted to pursue because I wanted to make money. And sales is where the money is. And I remember getting a job with this French construction equipment company that had a new subsidiary in Austria. And the CEO hired me because I was fluent in French. And I love the language. I speak French, English, and German. I was sort of the liaison between the factory headquartered in Paris and the Austrian subsidiary in Salzburg. So I flew to Paris a lot. I brought clients with me, showed them the factory, gave them factory tours. And after they saw the factory and met with the executives, they usually bought and signed deals in the order of $50,000 to $100,000. And I thought, this is a lot of fun because you get to go out in Paris, eat great meals, see great shows, talk to very intelligent people, and people start buying. And 2 years later, they transferred me to the headquarters in Paris, and I moved. And then soon was in charge of a sales training department. I had about 27 people, and we designed sales training material for 41 countries. They had about 1,600 salespeople, and we designed those sales training courses in 4 languages. It was a great experience because the company was growing like 35-40% year over year. It was the best known company in France besides Air France. And then they transferred me to the American subsidiary because they needed help. And they had adaptation problems, they have sales problems, distribution problems. I got involved in that and put all the resources that I knew were available from the French headquarters into the American subsidiary. And we started manufacturing in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And then there was a little bump in the economy. The company sold the American subsidiary to JIK Stroud and had everybody move to Wisconsin. My wife at the time says, I'm not moving to Racine, Wisconsin, where it's so cold that you have to plug in the car in to heat the radiator when you go grocery shopping in the winter. I always wanted to start my company. My wife had twins that were 7 months old when I quit my job. I had only about maybe $20,000 in savings and decided to start my company, which was a sales training company based on that interactive video training model that I developed, where I had salespeople do role plays, videotape them, give them feedback, have them rehearse, learn the skills, integrate those skills in their daily habits. I had great results with that methodology in Germany, in France, in England. Sales increases of 30 over 35% or more. I wrote articles about that in trade magazines in the United States, and I got a lot of calls. People called me and they wanted to have my system in their sales organization, which I did. Within a year of leaving the company, I made twice the money I made as an employee. And I like being independent. And then I had the, conversation with my wife. She says, you're traveling all the time and the twins are not going to see you grow up. Maybe you can find something where you don't have to travel. And I said, no problem. I designed so many sales training courses. So I developed a course called Nonverbal Selling Power that teaches salespeople how to use nonverbal communication techniques together with professional selling skills. And I sold it through direct mail. And I remember creating about 125 courses before I sent out the direct mail piece. And I had them in the basement of our townhouse. And I said, I'm really worried. The mailing is going out tomorrow. I'm looking at my inventory. And my wife said, well, I hope you sell at least one of those cases. And I said, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried, what if I get 250 orders? And she said, well, you'll be lucky if you sell half the inventory, or very lucky. And I sold all 125 within 2 months, charged about $500 for that. And then I took the next step and I said, I need another course so I can optimize my direct mail and sell 2 courses, but it was too expensive. So I said, can we reduce the direct mail cost? My designer said, well, if you want something cheap to print on, use newsprint. And I said, great idea. I like to read the Wall Street Journal. Why don't we create a little newspaper that's called Personal Selling Power? I put articles in there and then a 2-page ad for the course and send it out to 25, 30,000 people and see whether that works as a direct mail piece. So I had a publication as a direct mail piece. Sure enough, it worked. It pulled just as many responses as the fancy direct mail piece, and it cut the direct mail cost in half. And then something happened that I'll never forget. I got a call from Liberty Mutual in Boston, and the sales training director said, "Hey, I got you a Selling Power publication." He called it a publication, and I never thought, an 8-page newspaper direct mail piece would be considered as a publication. He says, "Can I buy a couple of hundred copies?" And I said, "Well, what would you want to do with that?" And he said, "Well, I want to distribute it to my sales team because they're really good articles." And I said, "Sure." So I sent him 200 copies and charged them like 60 cents a copy or something like that. So within a month, I sold 3,000 copies, unsolicited calls, because there was nothing available in sales in terms of good content. And then my wife said, "Well, maybe you have a second business." And I said, "What?" And she said, "The publishing business." And I said, "Good idea. Let me try that." So I created another issue of Volume 1, Number 2, and we decided to make this available 6 times a year. If you send us $12, you get a 1-year subscription. And I said, if I get 500 subscribers, I'm going to continue. If I get less, I'm going to refund the money. And within 6 weeks, I had 1,200 paid subscribers. By the end of the year, I had 7,500, 85% renewed. And then I was in the publishing business. And fast forward and that was 1981. By 1999, I was offered $10.5 million by Prime Media to sell the company. I made good money, and I said, "I don't need the money. I don't want to sell. I'm enjoying that. That's a labor of love. And I would do it for nothing,
And that's Selling Power magazine.
That was
right?
Selling Power magazine.
And is it still published today?
It is published online, yeah. Mm-hmm. The magazine really gave me sort of a passport to entry to the executive suite. I interviewed Michael Dell or Mark Benioff or Malcolm Forbes or Larry King, Jay Leno, Mary Kay Ash, Zig Ziglar. We did a cover story with the CEO of the Four Seasons Hotel in Toronto, and he bought like 70,000 copies and put a copy of Selling Power with his cover story in every room at every Four Seasons around the world.
Wow. And you never really envisioned yourself of becoming a publisher. It just took on a life of its own. You were creating all this great content in a direct mail piece, and sooner than later, it became a full-blown publication worth over $10 million. You didn't sell it. Are you glad you didn't sell it?
I was very happy not to sell it because it is a family business and kept the family together. It put our kids through college. It paid for a lot of bills and for a really good life. And I remember having a conversation with Mark Benioff over lunch in San Francisco where he said, "God, print is dead. You may as well find something else." I said, "What do you mean? We do like $8 million in advertising a year with Selling Power magazine." And he says, "Well, mark my words, it's going to go away. Everything is going to be digital." And he was right. And I thought, he's a very smart man. I may as well follow his advice. And that's when we got involved in the conference business. And I started the Sales 3.0 conference and did the first one in Washington, D.C.
What year was that?
12 years ago.
12 years ago. And you produce 3 or 4 or 5 of these Sales 3.0 conferences every year.
Exactly. Yeah. And, we also made the transition from live events due to COVID to virtual events. And now in live events, we got about 450 attendees, sales leaders attending. Now we get about 800 to 1,000 from 50 countries worldwide.
It's absolutely fascinating. And the other work that you are doing that I want to cover here in just a minute about mindset science.
Right.
You and I were talking about the implanted mindset story, the imprinted mindset, and the inspired mindset.
Right.
And I would really like to do a deep dive into that next. But first, Gerhard, I would like to take a quick break for our new sponsor here at Business of Story called Voices. And then we'll be right back. As a creative producer, you know how critical it is to find the right voice talent and production chops to create needle-moving, award-winning marketing. But who makes it easy to source the talent you need? Well, there's one place you can go for all of your production needs: Voices. Given that the future of creative production is through remote workers and freelancers, Voices has expanded its #1 creative services platform to make it easier than ever to produce your projects. Voices will match you with the right talent for voiceover, audio production, music composition, and translation services, tapping into professionals in over 160 countries. And they're not only good, but fast. Submit your project and you will get high-quality responses from top talent around the world in just a few hours, sometimes even in minutes after you've posted your job. That's why over 2 million registered creatives use Voices, including brands like Shopify, Microsoft, GoDaddy, Hulu, Black & Decker, and NBC. Plus, there's absolutely no risk to you of a production falling flat. Voices uses the exclusive SurePay service, so your funds are only released once the final files have been delivered and you are 100% satisfied with your production. So, if you're stressed out, under the gun, and you want your project to turn out perfectly, but you don't know where to turn, visit voices.com and post your job today. That's voices.com, where a world of production talent is simply a click away for you. Welcome back to the show with my friendly guest here, Gerhard Gschwandtner. I look at the spelling of that name and I got to tell you, it throws me. I've always been one to get tongue-tied on long, involved names. Schwandtner. Fantastic name, Gschwandtner. I think I got it down finally.
You got it. You graduated.
Well, it's my mindset. I look at these things and I I don't want to blow this guy's name, and then I end up blowing him. So let's talk about your mindset work and mindset science. It's fascinating because you work in peak performance for salespeople and help them, and maybe this plays back to helping those amateurs act and appear like professionals until they really feel the part, I guess. So can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, I want to bring it back to an experience I had when I was about 12 years old. I love to read books, and I picked up a book in the library on hypnosis, how to hypnotize somebody. I was in the middle of the book. I did not even know how to get somebody out of a hypnotic state, but I read how to get somebody into the hypnotic state. And my younger brother asked me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm reading about hypnosis." And he says, "Can you hypnotize me?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "Well, close your eyes and you feel your eyelids getting heavy, and you're relaxing, and you just surrender to my voice at this point. We are going to have a good experience." And I knew he was under, because I said, your right hand all of a sudden gets very, very light, and he moved it up. And I said, now it gets heavy again, and then he moved it down. And then I had to improvise, and I said, I'm putting a red ball, but I had a pen. I'm putting a red ball in your hand. And he was holding it like a ball. And then I said, the ball is now getting very hot for some reason. And he dropped it. And that was essentially it. And then I said, well, now you're no longer tired, and you wake up. And I had to walk him through back to normal. And I said, now open your eyes. He opened his eyes, and the first words were, "Where's that red ball?"
And you had no red ball.
I had no red ball. I said, that's the pen. He couldn't believe it, because, and I realized as a kid, as a 12-year-old, that words have amazing power, that even the words of somebody else have an impact on other people. So when you look at the research by NIH, they say that we experience about 60,000 words a day, and 80% of those words are negative, which is amazing, that we are really wired, our self-talk is sort of wired to be negative. I wanted to look into, where does that negative self-talk come from? And why is it repetitive? Why does it repeat year after year after year? that we remember all those negative experiences, like you shared that negative experiences playing piano as a kid in front of parents, and you made mistakes and you felt ashamed. And it is that narrative, that story that you told yourself as a kid: I blew it, I should have been better, and therefore I'm a bad piano player in front of other people. And therefore I make a decision not to play the piano in front of 5 relatives. You think about it, that mindset, that story has been implanted in you. And that's hard to unplant. And you can change that narrative. So the implanted mindset is really all the experiences we have as children, either in certain situations, like you playing the piano, but in your interactions with your parents. So I remember very distinctly at one point where my father told my mom, "Gerhard will never amount to anything, because he's so klutzy. He's not good with his hands." And I heard that and I thought, I could have taken it 2 ways. One is being devastated that my father doesn't believe in me, or being rebellious and say, I want to prove that SOB wrong. I think my early successes probably come from that experience. So you have the implanted mindset that's sort of a given, that as a kid, you don't have any choice. But then you go out, go to school, get exposed to teachers and professors and mentors and coaches, and they impress you. And that impression that they leave in your mind is the imprinted mindset, the imprint ideas that you live by, that you incorporate into your playbook for a living. But there's another level of mindset, which I remember when I interviewed Mary Kay, she said, so many people die with their music still unplayed. She said, everybody's born with an instrument, and you need to learn what it is. You need to learn how to play it. Everybody has an inner voice that speaks to you. When everything is quiet, you have a narrative and you have an idea of who you are. And that little voice inside needs to be paid attention to. That's your inspired mindset. And people need to ask themselves, why am I here? Why am I here in this life? How did I make it here? What a miracle that is. And what do I want to do with that power that has been given to me to do anything you want? And how do you empower yourself and let go of that mindset that tells you you never amount to anything, or let go of that mindset, the implanted mindset that tells you I cannot play the piano in front of 5 people?
Gerhard, when did you start really coming across this realization? I mean, you go back to when you're 12 years old and you're hypnotizing your brother, but it probably wasn't then. Was it that particular avenue intersected with your sales training over the years, and at one point in that intersection you had an aha moment?
I think that the story of you, of who you are, is a narrative that you create. And you cannot do it alone. You need to create it with other people. Like somebody once said, it takes a village to raise a healthy child. We all take our cues from other people, and we are very socially dependent. We want to understand ourselves in childhood through our parents. So we begin to create a narrative about ourselves depending on what our parents say about us. But then as we go out, I remember conversations with my professors in school and on how they judge my talents and what they think about my talents. I think about their encouragement. I've been blessed to run into people who believed in me and encouraged my talents. And I use that to continue to learn and explore and try to be better. For example, when COVID started, I started to play chess. I played chess as a kid, but not for long. And I discovered I really loved this game. I wanted to get better. But then in the process, I lost a lot of games. You can play online with a lot of people, and they trick you and they use gambits on you that you don't know. And that pain of losing, that shame of losing, turns into the motivation to learn from your losses and analyze your game. And the computer can tell you where you went wrong. And then you realize you have a learning opportunity. So to me, we need to learn about two things. One is about life, that's on the outside. But secondly, we got to learn who we are. What are the best qualities? How do you become a peak performer? How can you lead a life that's optimized on a physical level, on a psychological level, or a spiritual level, so that you move forward confidently towards your dream that is meaningful to you?
So how do you do that, Gerhard? How do you find what's meaningful to you?
People need to discover who they really are, and that is hard. People idealize maybe too much about themselves, but also most of the time people put themselves down unnecessarily. So they listen to their inner voice and they see, well, I don't feel adequate. I'm not cut out to be a leader, or I'm not going to win that sale. They look in terms of life, in terms of negative capabilities. There is a study by Dr. Marty Seligman. He discovered, working at the University of Pennsylvania, that the explanatory styles that people use to appraise their experiences determine their future. And we even did a study of 400 selling power readers, where we divided them into two categories: those that earned over $1 million and those that were average performers that earned maybe $80,000 to $150,000. The super achievers, we call them, they have had a similar level of education. We were curious why they were succeeding and getting much better results than the average achievers. What we found, or what Dr. Epstein found, is the way they think about themselves makes all the difference. They have a high self-esteem. They encourage themselves. They have no problem loving themselves. They are very realistic in terms of probabilities, and they know that they're going to fail a lot, but the failure is not going to define them. Failures are just byproducts of the quest for success. Many times, the more you fail, the more you learn, the more you win. We need to be very careful how we think about ourselves and our successes and failures.
So Gerhard, it's one thing to say that and look at the data, and you can prove that out in a percentage of the high performers, the top achievers, and why that's happening. It's a whole nother thing to actually use that on yourself. So maybe our limiting beliefs and negative self-talk are holding us back, but what can people realistically do about it versus just thinking, oh, this is just some other, woo-woo, telling me I'm much better than I really am, but I don't believe it. What can we actually do to overcome that?
The baby step in changing the conversation about yourself is to do a mindfulness exercise. Close your eyes for a second. As you breathe in, you say to yourself, I'm aware of my body. And as you exhale, you say, I'm letting go of all my tension. So I'm aware of my body as I breathe in. As I breathe out, I'm letting go of all my tensions. So that is a sort of a mini exercise that instantly changes your physiology. Your awareness is focused on breathing in and breathing out, and on one sentence breathing in, another sentence breathing out. It's very simple. So you realize that baby step gets you in touch with powers that you have not utilized yet. So the next step beyond that is just to look at your self-talk, your automatic thoughts, as guests that come to your guest house. You are the owner of a guest house, and your thoughts are guests. They come and go. They stay for a while, and then they'll leave. As the owner of a guest house, you can sit on the inside and a negative thought comes in, and instead of showing them the door or fighting that negative thought or engaging in a non-constructive way with that negative thought, you just invite in like a guest and say, have a seat on my couch, and maybe be curious and say, where you come from. And then you know that you are different from your self-talk. You're separate. You can separate yourself from your self-talk and allow that thought to happen. And if you are the observer of your thought, you disengage from that thought. You allow that thought to rest and exhaust himself or herself, and let it be. And that thought will eventually disappear and fade if you don't engage with it. And that's like breathing in, breathing out. You take control of your mental focus. And by considering every thought as a guest in your guest house that you own, you empower yourself to separate yourself from your thought. You're not your thoughts. You're creating those thoughts unconsciously. So then the third step is sort of to meditate and reflect on ebb and flow of your thoughts, and maybe create a journal. By the end of the day, you write down some of the thoughts that distracted you during the day, that gave you negative feelings. By writing them down, you diminish their power. The next step beyond that is talk back at those thoughts once they're written down.
What do you mean talk back to him? Like, oh, here you are again. You've just showed up at my guest house. What are you doing here? Or
no, for example, I played piano as a kid and I felt ashamed. Therefore, I am a bad person, or therefore I'm a poor performer. And therefore, I am not worthy of playing in front of anybody else. So then you put that in the left-hand column. In the right-hand column, you say, well, that happened as a child, and my childhood is over. I felt ashamed, and as a child, I was ashamed. But today, when I play the piano, I played not to be judged, but to express myself. And I am not able to, play in front of 5 people, or you can say, I have the capacity to play in front of 10,000 people. And I can make the decision. In a way, you edit your negative thoughts by giving them a different adult perspective, because you created those thoughts as a child. And now as an adult, you have the capacity to appraise the situation more objectively and be kinder to yourself, so you get past that shame.
So if we walk through these steps, do I have this right, that if we don't take that step number one and start, practicing some mindfulness and work on our self-talk, these negative thoughts and discussions in our head that are totally natural and we can't even really control them are going to run roughshod over us, and they are going to identify a large part of us, our success and our failures, because we have this negative talk going. So we start with that first step of just getting kind of control over our brain. And then as that thought comes up, they're like our Airbnb. We own the house. They're passing through. They hang out. We can even talk to them. How's it going? Whatever. All right, time for you to leave. Write them down. Embrace them. Don't push them away. Don't fight them, because that would probably give them that much more power. But write them down and say, oh, okay, I'm kind of curious where you came from, and let's take a look at that. And then say, all right, well, let's give them a bit of a character. Or in my case, that was when I was a child, way back when. They're still showing up at my Airbnb. I need to probably not invite them in anymore. Or if they do show up, wave at them out the window and let them keep going. But basically regain control of our own positive talk and know that this negative self-talk can be completely natural and out of our control, unless we embrace it and say, we don't have to be defined by it. We can let it come, go, and let's move on to more positive things.
Yeah, and also you're buying back your inner peace that you deserve.
When you're teaching sales professionals this, salespeople are typically hard-charging, quota seeking. I got to have this happen. I need a silver bullet right now to make me effective and get me into that top 10% high achievers. How many on average will embrace this, and how many will say, Gerhard, that's all too woo-woo. Let me just go back and do what I know how to do, even when they're not hitting quota?
The biggest driver is when we talk with salespeople, we usually ask them, what do you want for yourself? You're not selling for the company, you're selling for yourself. What do you want to get as a result of that sales job? And some people say, well, I want to buy a vacation home in North Carolina, or I want to do a yoga workshop in India, or I want to go heli skiing in Alaska. The big unanswered question that many salespeople miss is the why. Why do you want what you want? And once you have your why down, you visualize it. You put a picture on the refrigerator or your bedroom mirror. But the principle is the bigger the why, the bigger the try, the easier the how. If you're just in sales to make money, I think you're going to feel miserable.
So what that money makes happen in your life, and it's much more than just buying things typically, it's those experiences that you want to have.
Exactly. You want to sort of dignify your work with something that makes it all worthwhile. So if you can save enough money to put your grandchild through college, there could be a noble purpose. And everybody needs a noble purpose, because life doesn't come with a manual that guarantees meaning. You got to create that manual, and you got to define the meaning for yourself.
Gerhard, in all these years and all the success that you've had with Selling Power Magazine, Sales 3.0 conferences, your Mindset Science program, and helping people, what is your why now, and has it changed from when you were a young man?
Well, I remember the first time I saw a very, very successful salesperson. I was in a coffee house in Salzburg, and he was a salesman who was absolutely brilliant, eloquent. He said, well, I sell household equipment, washing machines, washers, dryers, dishwasher, and kitchens. He said, I let the customer do the walking. I rent a room at a hotel, get, about 50 people in the room, make a presentation, show all the equipment, and write orders. And he had a bankroll of money, and he was happy with what he was doing. It was a great performance. It was entertaining. When I look at all the great salespeople, they lead amazing lives. They're having a ball. They're having fun. And to me, what gives me meaning is I remember the first time I got results from helping salespeople beyond selling skills, teaching mindset. There was one sales rep who had a mental block about selling farm buildings to farmers was comfortable for him because he knew how farmers were thinking, but the same buildings were used for industrial buildings. He had a problem because A, there was a different customer. B, the buildings were more expensive. And I tried to diagnose what is the real issue. You get more commission if you sell a more expensive building. You work less hard. You can work smarter. It took about an hour of asking a lot of questions until he blurted out. He says, I'm having a hard time getting somebody to write a check for something that's bigger than what I make in a year. I said, where does that come from? Well, my father always said it's not a good idea to buy anything on credit. And I said, well, there are two different issues. Let's say you make $80,000 a year, $100,000 a year, and the building is $200,000. That building doesn't get destroyed after a year. It lives another 30 years. So you got to compare apples with apples. And he never thought that way. And plus, you're not buying the building. The customer is buying the building. The idea of buying everything cash, is long gone. We're in a different society. And you got this from your dad. So once he realized that he created that own roadblock, he eliminated the roadblock. The following year, he wrote me a letter and says, my sales are 300% higher. And I thought, my words made a difference, like my words make a difference with my younger brother holding a red ball. You need to be aware, we all need to be aware that any conversation we have with other people, it can make a huge difference in their lives because they need to hear that message. And I think it's a privilege to be in that position.
Absolutely. And you took him through those 3 stages of stories, didn't you? He had an implanted story that was holding him back. You then, as a mentor, imprinted a new story on him.
Right.
That had completely changed his perspective. And now he's got this inspired mindset, this self-talk mindset that led to 300% growth in his success rate.
Right.
Just simply by changing this story.
Right. What fascinates me about you is that you're teaching people the value of a story. You think about the value of a story in terms of change and persuasion. And I think that we need to become better in creating a story about ourselves. We are the performer and the performance. And our ability to perform becomes better by creating a better structure for our story, which is our life. I invite people to think about 2 ways of looking at life. One is through the lens of the explorer, and the other one through the lens of the exploiter. The explorer always looks for new things. The exploiter looks at the same thing and say, how can I extract more juice out of that lemon? Whereas the explorer is not concerned about that and tries to find out how can we create more lemons for everybody.
The explorer versus the exploiter. I've
Right.
never heard it put that way before, Gerhard. I love that. That is fantastic. How can people learn more about you? I mean, you are certainly an explorer in the sales world, in the sales realm, and helping people overcome these imprinted stories to really have great success, and then giving them the techniques to do it through Selling Power Magazine, through your sales conferences. Where can they learn more about you, and what's next up that they could take immediate advantage of from your wisdom?
Well, thank you for asking that question. They can go to sellingpower.com. They can also go to mindsetscience.com. They can also learn about our Sales 3.0 conference, and it's advertised on sellingpower.com all the time. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time all the way from Fredericksburg, Virginia. You're still out there with your lovely wife.
Exactly. We're loving it.
She did not move to Racine, Wisconsin. Smart man, Gerhard.
Right. That was actually my biggest sale, telling my wife to marry me. And we met on a Tuesday. We had dinner on Thursday. And after dinner, I said, I think we should spend the rest of our lives together. And 6 weeks later, we were married. And that was 49 years ago.
Are you kidding? That sounds like fodder for a whole nother podcast episode. That's amazing. Well, Gerhard, thank you for taking the time. Really enjoyed having you on the show.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. Man, oh man, just such great insight leveled here today. If you know of someone who can benefit from this, by all means, please share this episode with them. And if I can help you, come on over to businessofstory.com, where I've got all sorts of tools, techniques, tips, and talent like Gerhard there to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. If you have yet to pick up my new book, which would be your new book, The Narrative Gym for Business, please go to Amazon. It's there now in print edition for you, as well as Kindle. And of course, I have my companion online course, The ABTs of Selling, that you can find at businessofstory.thinkific.com. Remember to come back next Monday when we will have another story artist right here for you, just like Gerhard. But until then, and Gerhard, you are going to love this sign-off, I believe. Remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.